Well, welcome to week 8, the finale of a series we've been in called Breaking Up a Fight. I want to welcome those of you joining us at one of our campuses, either downtown or at Amarillo. If you're watching church online or on TV, we're glad that you're joining with us as well. Have you ever noticed that married couples can fight about the silliest things? Especially the longer you've been married, the sillier the things get that you fight about. How many of you guys know if you're married that you fought about some silly things before? Raise your hands all over campuses. If you're not raising your hand, you are a liar. Okay, I'm glad you're in church today. Okay, so we fight about silly things. I was talking to my wife recently. I said, hey, babe, what's the silliest thing we fought about recently? She said, oh, I know. I was like, what is it? She's like, it's the blender. I'm like, yeah, the blender. I remember that. That was silly. Because here's what happened. I bought myself a blender, okay, because I'm mixing up some protein shakes. The reason I'm doing that, I was trying to gain some weight so that one day I weigh more than my dog. And so because I want to, all right, I'm buffing up, okay? And I'll be at the gym. Sometimes you see me at the gym, okay? I'm the guy over on the bench press. And what I'm doing is I unrack too much weight. And so I get it down. I don't always have a spot. And then I can't get it back up, okay? This happened to me once in college. It was a bad day. I was doing bench press, and I got this thing down on me. I didn't have a spot, somebody helping me. I got it down on me, and I was like, and it wouldn't go. It just would not move. And so I thought, okay, what are my options? What are my options? I can roll it this way, I break my neck. I can roll it the other way, I wouldn't be able to have children. And so, I needed some help. So there's this frat daddy next to me. Okay, he's on the bench press over here, frat daddy. I'm like, hey, frat daddy, come here. I need some help. Okay, it's down like this. He comes over, one hand, grabs the thing, lifts it up, and racks it. I'm like, it was heavier than that, I thought. I think it's heavier than that. I'm sorry. I'm adding weight to the size. Okay, so I bought this blender, mixing up these protein shakes. And here's the thing. Because I use it a couple times a day, I like to leave the base on the counter so I don't have to put it back out. Get it out of the cabinet, put it back out. So I leave it on the counter. My wife puts it up. I'll leave it on the counter. She puts it up. I'll leave it on the counter. I say, babe, I'm leaving that on the counter on purpose. Okay, that's supposed to stay there. She said, no, it's not going to stay there. And so I leave it out. She puts it up. Leave it out. She puts it up. I'm like, babe, we need to have a conversation about this, okay? You get the whole counter, okay? I want one little spot for my blender base, okay? You got these trinkets everywhere, decorative stuff. You got this scale, vintage from the 50s. You put a banana on it, it would break, okay? Like, can I have a spot for my blender, please? So we had an issue, okay? It was an issue. We didn't have to see a counselor, thankfully. We got it figured out, okay? And I got a spot on my counter, okay, for a little blender now. All right, it's just hidden and not in plain view. Okay, so married people, if you're married, you can fight about silly things. We've been talking in this series about how it's easy for us to get into fights. What's hard is breaking them up. We're good at getting into them, not as good at breaking them up. And so in this series, our teacher for breaking up a fight has been the brother of Jesus. Isn't that pretty cool? That we have an ancient document in our New Testament written by the brother of Jesus, and in it, in James 3 and 4, James is trying to break up a fight in his church. And we said as we watch him attempt to break up this fight, we can learn about how to break up fights in our own lives, in our marriages, among family members and friends. We can learn, we can be taught by James. That's what we've been doing in this series. And we said last weekend, if you weren't here, was the climax where we challenged you to reconcile all unreconciled relationships in your life. To make a list of people you need to say you're sorry to, ask for forgiveness from, and to do it. To make the phone call, to write the letter. We've gotten some great emails, heard some great stories this week of relationships that are coming back together again. It's so powerful. If you have a story like that, please let us know. But here's how I wanted to end the series. One more part of James 4 that some commentators think is still connected to kind of the fight scene that we've been going through. And it's basically James saying, here's what you do after. Like you're in a fight, right? You break it up. You say, I'm sorry, will you forgive me? Forgiveness is given. You break up the fight. What do you do next? What do you do after the fight with this person is broken up? I think James is going to tell us today. Looking forward to it. James chapter 4, if you got a Bible. James 4, beginning in verse 11. A few more verses and we'll finish out James 4 for this series. Here's James talking to his church. They've broken up a fight. Last week we saw how he said, hey, let it bring you to tears, the fact that you've been in this fight. Humble yourself, God's going to lift you up in honor. Okay, so it's like, break this thing up, and then this is what he says. Verse 11, don't speak evil against each other, talking to his church. Hey, you guys, stop fighting. Let's not fight anymore. Don't speak evil against each other, dear brothers and sisters. If you criticize and judge each other, then you're criticizing and judging God's law. So if you break the law by criticizing and judging the person you've been fighting with, you're judging that the law doesn't apply to you. That's why you broke it, because you've just made the judgment that, hey, the law doesn't apply to me. I'm just going to do whatever I want to do. I don't have to follow God's law. James is like, but your job is to obey the law, not judge whether or not it applies to you. So here's what you need to focus on. This is what he's telling them as church. You need to focus on obeying the law. Now that the fight's broken up, focus on what you need to be doing. You don't need to focus on judging them. You need to focus on criticizing them, figuring out if they're keeping God's law, okay? Here's what you do. You focus on you. You focus on you obeying the law. Now, when you hear the law, they would have understood what James was talking about. And this is kind of how Paul summed it up. James would have agreed. Jesus said something similar in Galatians 5. This is what he's telling them to obey. 14 and 15. Paul said the whole law can be summed up in this one command. To sum up the whole thing, here it is. Love your neighbor as yourself. That sums it up. Because if you love your neighbor as yourself, you don't kill him. You don't steal from him. You don't lie to him. Okay? So you see, the other things are fulfilled in this. Love your neighbor like you love yourself, Paul says. But if you're always biting and devouring one another, watch out. Beware of destroying one another. So what happens, what's Paul saying? This is another letter, Galatians. What's Paul saying happens when you don't love your neighbor like you love yourself? What's going to happen? You're going to fight. You're going to fight. And relationships then can end up being destroyed. Did you know James's brother, half-brother Jesus, said something similar to what Paul's saying here? They asked him one day, hey, Jesus, what's the greatest commandment? Jesus said, the first one's this, you got to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. He said the second's like it. You got to love your neighbor, how? As yourself. He said all the law, Jesus said this, all the law and all the prophets hang on these two commands. So they're summing it up. Paul's summing it up. Jesus summing it up. Love your neighbor like you love yourself. So James's audience, when they're hearing obey the law, they're going, okay, I know how it's summed up. I got to love my neighbor like I love myself. James keeps going. Last verse 12. God alone who gave the law is the judge. He alone has the power to save or to destroy. So what right, fight's broken up now, what right do you have to judge your neighbor? He starts using this neighbor language. It's going to remind him of this love your neighbor as yourself thing. He's saying, okay. The fight's broken up now. Now don't judge your neighbor again, because that leads to fighting. Don't criticize them, say mean things, and be unkind to them. That leads to fighting. Here's what you got to do. Don't judge your neighbor. Love your neighbor. You know that. Don't judge your neighbor. James saying, love your neighbor. Don't judge him. Don't criticize him. Love him. And he doesn't say, Jesus, Paul, James, love him a little bit. Love him kind of, sort of. The law says love them how? Like you love yourself. So James's audience would have been hearing this going, oh, see, here's the thing. We love ourselves a lot. So you're saying we got to love them like that? Like I love me some me. That's what they're thinking, okay? So if I got to love them like I love me, that's a lot of love. I don't know, James. I don't know if I can do that. James knows if they love others, the people they've been fighting with, like they love themselves, guess what? They're not going to fight with them again. Because they're going to fight with themselves. And they're loving them like they love themselves. It's like James is saying, don't judge your neighbor, love him. And if you do, you're not going to fight with them. It'll change everything. So now for us here at Experience Life, maybe some of you in the last week, as you wrote down the list of names you needed to be reconciled with, maybe you made some phone calls, written some letters, maybe some relationships have been reconciled. Fantastic. You know what you should do now? Like, well, I got something else to do? Are you serious? That was hard enough just saying I'm sorry. Here's what you do now. Love them like you love yourself. What? No, I can say I'm sorry. I don't know if I can love them like that because I love me some me. Okay, I got to love them like that? I don't know. That's what they're saying. James saying, don't judge your neighbor. Love them. The person you've been fighting with, the way you're going to keep from fighting with them again is love them like you love you. Serve them like you serve yourself. Do for them the kinds of things you do for yourself, and think about how much we love ourselves. Here's the thing, list of things we do for ourselves that just proves how much we love ourselves. We take care of ourselves, don't we? Because we love ourselves. We protect ourselves. We defend ourselves. We provide for ourselves. We encourage ourselves to look at ourselves in the mirror and be like, you are good looking today. Okay, we buy things for ourselves. Like you do these things for yourself, right? So it sounds like what Jesus, James, Paul are saying is if you take care of yourself, protect yourself, defend yourself, and so on, you should do those things for your neighbor as well. Because you should love them like you love you. And by neighbor, again, we're not talking about just your next door neighbor, okay? It just means other people. Love your neighbor, love other people, especially the people you've been fighting with, like you love yourself. If this is how you love yourself, then why don't you do some of these things for them? Why don't you take care of them? Why don't you protect them? Why don't you defend them? If you're defending them, you're not going to fight with them because you're trying to defend them. Why don't you do some of these things for them? Next step, James is saying, after you've broken up the fight, is start loving them, that person you've been at war with, like you love you. If you do, chances are you're not going to end up in a fight with them again. Now, what's an example of this? I mean, love your neighbor like you love yourself. Is anybody doing that? I mean, what's in it? What's an example? Well, I was thinking about it. And one example that came to mind is what many people did for the Jews during World War II, during Hitler's reign, where there was a state-sponsored genocide of the Jewish race because they were seen, Adolf Hitler propagated this, seen as an inferior race. They wanted to get rid of the Jews. They didn't want the Jews in Germany or in German-occupied territories. They wanted to get rid of the Jews. They're an inferior race. So here's some of the things they did to the Jews. The persecution started kind of small, and then it escalated. In Germany, in German-occupied territories, the universities would refuse degrees to Jewish people. This is the early 40s, 1940s, not that long ago. 1940s, Germany. They would deny degrees to Jews that were studying, that had earned a degree. They would deny the degrees to them because they were Jews. Hitler told them to boycott their businesses. So throughout Germany and German-occupied territories, they would boycott the businesses of Jews. Jews would go out of business. People wouldn't hire them because, again, they were boycotting their business and wanted nothing to do with them. Couldn't marry them, didn't want them in your family. They wanted them out of Germany, didn't want to pollute the race. They were told not to be their friends. They were forced to wear a yellow star. Many of them would sew it to their shirt, to their jacket, so that people would know they were a Jew and could avoid them, could have nothing to do with them. Persecution continued to get worse. Concentration camps were set up where millions of Jews were sent, and they would die of exhaustion or die of disease. It got even worse. Some were sent to extermination camps where there were gas chambers, and up to 2,000 Jews could be put into a room at a time, close the doors, fill it with carbon monoxide, and kill all the Jews. Millions were killed this way. Medical experiments were done on them. They test drugs on the Jews. They wanted to see how long it would take for somebody to freeze to death. Now they had humans to test it on. So they tried to freeze the Jews to death and just see how long it would take a human being to die, freezing to death. They would inject chemicals into children's eyes, just see what would happen. Jewish children just want to see what would happen. So they take chemicals and just inject them into kids' eyes. As a result of all this, about 6 million Jews were murdered. 3 million men, 2 million women, about 1 million children. 1940s. So you can imagine if you're a Jew in Germany or in a German-occupied territory at this time, you're either trying to get out of the country or you're looking for a place to hide. Unfortunately, for those that couldn't get out of the country, a lot of people that used to be their friends wouldn't let them come into their house because they were Jews and they had the star, and I don't want anything to do with the Jew, they pollute our race. But there were some Germans, some people in German-occupied places that would have no part in abandoning their Jewish friends. And so when they would come to their door, knocking, pleading, would you take me in? I don't have anything to eat. They're going to kill us. Me and my family, would you take us in? There were some families that said, we'll take you in. And those families knew it could cost them their lives. Not just the Jewish people that they hid, but their own lives, because that would have been illegal. One of the families that did this in the Netherlands at the time was a family known as the Ten Boom family. Maybe you've heard of Corrie Ten Boom. Wrote a book called The Hiding Place. Well, they were watchmakers, had a watchmaker shop, had friends that were Jews. When their friends came knocking at their door, they didn't do what a lot of the other people were doing. Get away from us, you're Jew, get away from us. They let them in. They let them stay with them. They provided for them. They got extra ration cards so that the Jews would have something to eat. They would hide them. They developed a buzzer system in their house so that if the Gestapo, the German police, the Nazis got anywhere near the house, they would hit the buzzer and the Jews would all hide in different places in the house. They were part of the resistance, is what it was called, where they were having Jews come to their house. They were trying to get them out of the country. They were going to other hiding places. But in time, they knew they needed to hide them better than just under a bed or in a closet. So they had a false wall created in their house so they could have this secret kind of entrance into this room, this closet, and the Gestapo wouldn't be able to find them there. It looked like this in the Tin Boom house. This is an actual picture of it. This was filled in. This was the wall. There was a spot under here. They pushed a dresser up against this. You could pull it out, and they could kind of crawl into this little closet, and they could hide there. So there were times where they'd ring the buzzer. The Gestapo was near the Tin Boom house, and they would get him in this little hiding place, and they didn't get caught. Well, in time, the German police found out about what the Tin Boom family was doing. So they showed up at their house. They searched through the house trying to find the Jews. They knew there were Jews there. They asked them where they were. They wouldn't give up their location. And because of this, they weren't able to find them. But they knew they had been a part of hiding Jews. And so they arrest the whole family. Corrie, who's in her, I believe, early 50s at the time, her sister, and their father. And they send the family, the Gestapo, the German police, to a concentration camp for hiding Jews. 2 of them didn't make it. The dad died. The sister, Betsy, died also in the concentration camp. She's famous for a quote. Corrie's sister is, maybe you've heard this before, but she said this of life in the concentration camp, which was awful, like hell on earth. She said, "There is no pit so deep that he is not deeper still." Meaning, there's no place that's so bad or suffering that's so horrible that God isn't there with me, helping me to endure through it. Soon after this, she died. So this family recognized they were risking their lives to hide the Jews, and it cost 2 of them their lives. Corrie lived to tell about it and traveled all over the world telling about what happened. But here's the thing. The Tin Booms, they were Christians. Do Christians and Jews have similar things in common when it comes to beliefs about Jesus? They do not. Jews don't believe he's the Messiah. Jews don't believe he rose from the dead. So you could see some Christian being tempted to fight with the Jews. Hey, they're getting what they deserve. They don't believe in Jesus, and fight and be unkind to them. Perhaps there could have been that temptation, which would have been from the enemy. But many didn't buy into the temptation, didn't give into the temptation. They recognized, even though we disagree with them on something major, that doesn't mean we're going to fight with them. That doesn't mean we're going to be unkind to them. We're going to love our neighbor. They're our neighbor. We're going to love them like we love ourselves. So the Tin Boom family, instead of fighting with the Jews over a religious belief or whatever, instead of saying, this is what you deserve because you're Jewish or whatever, they were kind to them. They let them come in, and it cost 2 of them their life. I just think that's a great example of what it would look like for you and me to love our neighbor like we love ourselves. Because that's something we'd want somebody to do for us. If we were a Jew looking for a place to hide, we would hope somebody would let us in, even if it was a great risk to their own life. And reading stories like this in that book or seeing movies about this time in history always caused me to ask the question, if I lived in Germany at that time or in a German-occupied territory, would I have hidden a Jew? Ask yourself that question. If you knew it could cost you and your family your lives, would you have hidden? If one of your Jewish friends knocked on your door and said they're trying to kill me, would you have hidden them? Because if you know, I would have taken the risk. Then you might understand this law that James is telling them to obey, where he says we should love other people, our neighbor, like we love ourselves. If you would house one, if you'd risk your life to protect them because you'd protect yourself, to defend them because you'd defend yourself, maybe you understand what it would be like to love somebody like you love yourself. My hope for me and my family is we'd be brave enough and courageous enough and trust God enough that even if we disagreed with somebody about something, wouldn't let it turn to unkindness, but we'd say, come on in. We'll create a hiding place. Come on in. We're going to help you. We don't want to see you end up in a gas chamber. Love your neighbor like you love yourself. You do that, it's going to keep you from fighting with them because you're doing for them what you do for you. Taking care of yourself, protecting yourself, defending yourself, encouraging yourself. You're doing that for them because that's what you do for you. You love them that much because you love yourself that much. So the challenge, last challenge really in this series is simply this. the person that you've been fighting with, that hopefully you've broken it up now, hopefully you've been reconciled with, why don't you take it one step further? And why not this week or soon? Why don't you love them like you love yourself? Why don't you protect them? Why don't you defend them if somebody's saying something bad about them? Why don't you encourage them? Why don't you take them to lunch? Why don't you get them a gift card? Why don't you try to figure out what one of their needs might be and try to meet their needs? Why don't you keep their kids for them one night so that they and their spouse can go out on a date? Why don't you ask God, what would it look like to practically love this person I've been fighting with like I love myself? What could I do for them, with them, to show them how much I love them? I recognize you hear that and you're like, that's hard. I don't know, that's hard. I get it, it's hard. James says God gives us grace to do things that are hard. For sure it's hard. You've been fighting with them, you're still kind of upset even though it's been reconciled. They've hurt you. I get it. Jesus said we're supposed to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us. Did you know that? So why don't you just pray this week and say, God, I'm so thankful this relationship is mended, the fight's broken up. Now help me to love them like I love myself. And as he helps you and gives you the grace, you're not going to fight with them. You can be too busy defending them and protecting them and taking care of them. Love your neighbor, James says. Focus on this. Don't focus on what your friends are doing. If other people are doing this, you just focus on you. Focus on obeying this law. Love your neighbor like you love yourself. If you and I did that, if we actually lived this out, it would change everything. Change our marriage, change our relationships in our family, change our relationships with our friends. If we just lived out how you sum up the law in this one command, namely, that we love other people like we love ourselves. That's a challenge this week for you and the people maybe that you've been reconciled with, that you had been fighting with. Now, the series has come to a close. I hope it's been powerful to you. I know if it hasn't been, it's been powerful to me. I've been preaching to myself. I need to hear this and remind myself of this. But there are really 3 takeaways from this series that I hope you get. To me, the series wasn't a success unless you get these 3 things from all of these 8 messages, and it's as follows. Number 1, you realize that fighting can destroy relationships. We talked about this several times. It hurts God, hurts other people, it destroys marriages. Fighting does. You see it all the time. It destroys relationships in families and among friends. Fighting can destroy relationships. You got to own it's a big deal. It's not a small deal. Having unreconciled relationships and being in fights, it's a big deal. People get hurt. Relationships can be ruined. Second, that you'd reconcile every unreconciled relationship in your life. We talked about this last week. That there wouldn't be anybody that you're persisting in a fight with where you've played a part and said something unkind to them, that you would ask for forgiveness from anybody you need to ask for forgiveness from. You'd forgive anybody that you need to forgive. But that you just make sure that the relationships in your life are right, that they're reconciled. That's the point of this series. That's the point of what James is saying. And then third, that you love people like you love you. That you take care of people like you take care of you. That you protect and defend people like you protect and defend you. Because the whole law is summed up in that. And as we start to live that out, we're not be fighting with people. We're too busy loving them like we love ourselves. Now, if you're like me, you look at this stuff and you're like, that's hard. That is hard. That's why I want to conclude this series just by saying a prayer for you, if you don't mind. And I just want to pray that as God gives us the grace to do these things, that we would humble ourselves to receive the grace, recognize that our temptation is to not do these things, and we'd allow God to help us do them, to help us be reconciled with people, to help us love people like we love ourselves. I don't know about you. I need somebody to pray for me, that God would help me to do that in my life. And I want to pray for you and myself, that God would help all of us as well. So can I do that as we close? Let me pray for you. God, we need grace to reconcile with people that we've hurt, to say I'm sorry and ask for forgiveness. We need grace to love other people like we love ourselves, to take care of them, defend them, encourage them, protect them. God, we need your help. That can be especially hard with somebody that we just broke up a fight with, but you call us to love people. That's the second greatest commandment according to Jesus. We're supposed to love people like we love ourselves, and all the law and the prophets hang on that commandment, and to love God with all of our heart. So God, help us to do it. We don't want to just come to this series and be like, oh, it's good. I enjoyed that. That's funny. I'll laugh some. That's good. God, we want our lives to be changed. We want to live this stuff out. What good is it if we just know it, we don't do anything about it? James says you just hear the word, you don't do it, you deceive yourself. God, I don't want anybody to be deceived in this series. I want people to live this stuff out because I know if they do, it'll change their life. It's changed my life, continues to change my life as I try to live this out as well. God, help us to live these things out that we've been reading in James. And as a result, I pray that you would heal broken marriages in our church and broken relationships among friends and broken relationships in families, that they be healed because we're humbling ourselves. We're learning from James, a great teacher, and we're applying these principles to our lives. I can't wait to see what you're going to do as we as a church humble ourselves, receive the grace to resist the temptation to fight and resist it and flee from it. You said you're going to lift us up in honor, and like we said last weekend, God, we're looking forward to seeing what that looks like in our church, in our families, in our lives. God, lift us up in honor as we humble ourselves before you and get relationships right in our lives. We're looking forward to what you're going to do. In Jesus' name, amen. Thanks for checking out one of our messages today. For more information about our church or to watch other messages, you can go to our website at experiencelife.now.com. Let us know if we can serve you in any way, and we hope to see you real soon.